Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world today. My name is Steve Hall. I am the Director of Content and Community with Procurement Leaders, and I am delighted to welcome you to today's webinar. We'll be looking at how digitized and transformed procurement can empower the future supply chain. We really find that, to no surprise, that digitalization is a super important topic when it comes to how procurement is thinking about its roadmaps, thinking about the transformation in front of it, thinking about the skills that the function needs. And as we start to think about the future supply chain, the question is, how can you and your organization adapt? And that comes down to whether you might be a CPO or whether you're a category manager. As you look at it at all the different levels, adapting and implementing technology to create what we've termed as this kind of well-oiled machine is crucial. So we're going to be thinking about some of the many facets of what you need to be looking at. So part of this might be looking at readiness. How do you know if you're ready to implement technology? What might you need in your organization to make sure that you're making the most of the solutions available to you? What trends do you need to pay attention to? I mean, there's a lot of noise about technology, and I have to be honest with you, as I look at some of the questions that people have sent in today, one of them caught my eye. Someone has written, blockchain, truth or dare? And this really kind of sort of frames the thinking for me. How do you know where you should be investing your time and effort? How do you know where to put in your effort so you're not creating more complexity and plunging resources into technology that ultimately isn't going to deliver the returns you want? We're going to be looking at sort of thinking about your organization's readiness. We're going to be looking at the capabilities you need, but we're also going to be getting a little bit excited about the potential here. So when you think about advanced data analytics, you think about the potential to automate, and you think about the potential to really put the power into your team's hands and into your business partners' hands to really make decisions and be flexible and be responsive. The opportunity here is huge, and the question is, what do you need to take away today to do differently? So as I think about how we're going to run today's webinar, I'm really excited to kind of offer you some additional resources there and to really focus you also on that Q&A piece. So we want to hear, and I'm going to introduce our panel in a moment, we really want to have a chance to hear from you. So please do at any time during today's webinar, you can see your Q&A box there. Do put in a question. We will be answering questions in the second half of today's webinar, and I know our panel are keen to get to those, so we'll very much like to sort of hear from you there. Speaking of the panel, we've been delighted to partner with GEP to bring you today's topic, and we're looking forward to hearing from Vivek Saneja, Vice President Supply Chain Solutions with GEP. A little bit on Vivek. He's had more than 20 years of industry experience in supply chain management, digital business transformation, business strategy and analytics. Prior to GEP, he held various leadership positions at TCS, Capgemini and Accenture, and in his last assignment he was the Global Head of Supply Chain with Anaplan. And he's really generally, what we're excited to have him on board as a kind of thought leader in applying emerging digital technologies to transform supply chains and business models. That really is something that we want to provoke you to kind of maybe think a little bit differently and maybe try and hear what other people are up to try and sort of learn what you could be doing. Where can you copy? Where can you lead? Thinking about learning about what others are up to, we're excited to show you a video today. So we're going to be hearing from Rami Swominen, Commercial Manager with Rolls-Royce. He spoke at our Data Intelligence and Technology event in London, provided a really interesting presentation on some of the excellent stuff that Rolls-Royce have been doing with regards to their logistics piece and their supply chain planning there, and we felt like it was a really good way to kind of illustrate this topic. So we're looking forward to kind of hearing from that and really hoping that it kind of sets you out as a little bit of a case study about what's possible and to really kind of provoke the thinking there. So just before I move on, obviously a very warm welcome to our panelists who we'll be hearing from. But a final reminder, please do get your questions in at any time. Don't wait for the Q&A piece. Do put those in at any time, and we'll get the chance to answer those in the second half. Okay, so with that, let's hear from Rami.
Why I'm here today is to share my experiences in a procurement within a business that is digitalized or turning itself in digital business. So we are starting from an OEM side and moving to a digital side of the world. And I'm going to do that by giving a brief introduction of what we do in Ship Intelligence and then sharing some of my takeaways within the business. So briefly who I am, Rami Suominen, Procurement and Global Category Manager for Ship Intelligence. I started in Rolls-Royce 2012. Procurement career I started in 2009 in a another Finnish company, and I've been in this digital side of Rolls-Royce since 2016. I joined the business to establish a supply chain for the world's first remote operated commercial vessel, Project Sisu, which I will also describe you guys a bit more. What is ship intelligence? So everything today is 4.0, and that's what we are also doing, Marine 4.0, the ship intelligence era, and we're driving the next big change within the marine industry. As it has already today once been mentioned, the marine industry is rather old-fashioned, so there hasn't really been any major changes since 1950s when the containers were introduced to the business. And that's what we are here for. We're driving the next big change through autonomy. And we're looking to do similar things that companies like Airbnb, Spotify, Amazon, Uber have done in their industries. So they've taken something that we all know and are familiar with and just remodeled it, turned it to something completely different. How we do this, I'm not going to give you a sales pitch, but a brief introduction. We have two solutions or solution areas that we provide for the markets, which on the left-hand side here we have the intelligent asset management, a business relying on gathering the data, understanding and analyzing the data. Here we are providing products like energy management for the measurement and energy efficiency of a vessel, plus health management solutions to predict the maintenances on the vessel. Right-hand side, we have remote and autonomous operation product portfolio, where we have products like Intelligent Awareness and Remote Operations Center. I'll discuss a bit more around these products on latest slides. A few words around the journey. So it really started in Rolls-Royce in 2013 as a vision. The next big change was in 2015 in Finland, when a AVA project was announced together with Finnish government, Rolls-Royce being there as a key industry driver. It is a consortium project consisting of universities, governmental research institutes, number of startups. Then in 2016, things really started going on from Rolls-Royce. I joined in, not because of that, but R&D center was established in Turku, Finland, and that's where the investment started. Then 2017, we were able to demonstrate that it is actually possible to remotely operate and control a commercial vessel. Earlier this year, 2018, we launched the first product from the remote and autonomous side, which is Intelligent Awareness System. We have partnered with industry key players like Google, European Space Agency, Inmarsat, Intel, big drivers in the business to help us really make the vision of autonomy true by 2025. Few words around Intelligent Awareness System. So what that is, it's a product providing situational awareness for the operator. It is highlighting hazards in real time, and by doing that, it is providing the user with better visibility in poor weather conditions during nighttime and increasing the safety of operations as a standalone product. What the system consists and actually is, it's a bunch of sensors. We are using daylight cameras, thermal cameras, lidars, AIS sonar, bunch of sensors, and we're taking each of those sensors sends a data stream. We take that data, we mash together through a process called sensor data fusion to really understand and build a bigger picture of the surrounding. Here you have a screen capture of what the system shows. It's a bit fancier today. The highlight boxes are around the objects, but using computer vision and machine learning, we are able to detect the object first of all, track it, and classify it. So we know whether the object on the screen is a tugboat or if it's a container vessel. And by classifying it, we also understand its behaviors. We know that tugboats have a certain speed and certain behavior, which is not the same as a container vessel might have. Then where the sensor fusion plays in is that from this image, for example, you might not be able to tell whether a spot in the distance is is a single vessel or if it's actually two vessels. So when we have a bunch of sensors, we take also the LiDAR data, for example, and fuse it together with the visual images to understand that, hey, that spot actually in the distance, it is not a single vessel, it is actually two different vessels. That data then from the intelligent awareness system is sent over to remote control station. So this is the operation station where the captain is able to remotely operate the vessel, steer it around, fulfill its operations. Images here are actual images from the Copenhagen remote control station. And the system is relying completely on the data and images being sent over from the vessel through the intelligent awareness system. So a few words around the SISU project. What it was, it was the world's first remote controlled commercial vessel. We did it in Copenhagen, Denmark in 2017 in collaboration with Switzer. During that test, we met over 400 validations. A big question is always cybersecurity in remote controlled and autonomous vessels. So we were able to pass 61 mandatory cybersecurity tests, and we were able to complete 16 hours of remote operations during the test, and those 16 hours were overseen by Lloyd's Register, a marine classification society. What happened in the test itself, there was a crew on board of the vessel who handed over the controls to shoreside remote control station, where a captain operated the vessel, so steered the vessel from pier to pier where it was moved, and then left over from there, did a 360-degree turn, sailed back to its starting position. The amount of data that is being sent over in this kind of activities is crazy. It is a vast amount of data, so we're not relying only on satellite connectivities, even though there is an image of satellite. So what we are actually doing is we're using an aggregated connectivity solution. So for example, in harbor area, there are 3G, 4G, wireless, and satellite connectivity, all available. And those are the solutions that we are relying on. Then a few words around my experiences in the business. So, of course, the SISU project was a challenge from technological point of view, but one big driver has also been that we are changing from, Rolls-Royce has always been an OEM, a manufacturing company, and now in one night we were suddenly a software company. So we have our existing ways of doing procurement. We have our processes and principles on which we do purchases. And when you take those processes that you've been using to buy bearings and seals and try to fit them into buying software development, doesn't work. Something needs to change. It's just a fact. So we've adapted new lean cultures like scaled agile framework and agile development methods, which I was happy to hear about today, that I'm not alone with the challenge. So biggest challenge here, aligning the procurement processes. As everyone knows, procurement is in the middle of number of stakeholders. It's not only the procurement processes that need to change, it's the finance, it's everything around us. And getting your management on board is the biggest challenge that I've seen in changing to the digital data-oriented business. We're not yet there. I can openly say that there's still work to do, but it's in a far more better position than when I started to work. Another big change that we've seen is types of services that we are buying. So we are buying, for example, the satellite connectivity solutions, but in addition to that, we've introduced or gotten ourselves into buying now crowdsourcing services, which are really interesting. New models of providing services. And the change there happens through contracting. So you are not able to properly use your existing contracts to get the best possible solution out of new type of services. here we have done a lot of work together with our suppliers to find a best possible fit to still maintain the agility, the freedom of movement for the development team within the project, while still as a business function, we want to know that if we spend X amount of money, what do we get against that X amount of money spent? So there needs to be a hybrid model combining both of the cultures there. Speaking of suppliers, we are also dealing a lot with SMEs, small and medium enterprises, but what I would really like to say is startups. So I've heard other companies also working with startups, and we've done quite a lot there also. So my experiences with startups are that they are great. They're really good. They show you that what agility means when you are Rolls-Royce, when you are a slow-moving company. And my key takeaways from them are that there are companies who are really great at what they do. They have niche, unique competence, and they know it. They might be the best of the world in sensor data fusion. So when they know it and they are the best of the world, it's really difficult to start benchmarking and really difficult to start leveraging against those suppliers. So you can work around. You get to agree with those companies. It's just a matter of discussion. But when you find your favorite startup to work with, there's still constant risk which we've encountered. So when you work with a startup, you're building their capability. You're making them more powerful, let's say. And when they become more capable, they also become more interesting for companies who are on the move, looking to acquire startups with the set of capability. And we've had it happen a few times that our favorite startup has been acquired by a company, and that has led to us having to stop our collaboration and move that work, whether in-house or to another third party. So always startup exit plan needs to be in place. Purchasing the undefined. This is a constant problem in agile development, which I also got some support today for. So in this development where we are creating something that hasn't yet existed anywhere ever. So you know in the beginning that you want to buy an animal. It has a long trunk for 4 feet, and it's great. Yeah, fine. Start purchasing that. When you've completed the project, you end up with a cardboard elephant, which is not exactly what you wanted, but actually the development team might state that, yeah, cardboard elephant is completely fine. We don't want it to be running around and eating grass, but you need a tail for it. So you, again, need to spend a bit more money to get the tail in. So purchasing the undefined is a constant problem, because when you can't define what you in the end want, there is a huge risk of how do you control your spend. That is something that I've struggled a lot, because you just need to accept that you can't know everything. There are different ways of finding a way to mitigate that risk, but to my experience, you can't completely take that risk out of the picture when you're developing something for the first time in the world. And while you're doing that development, you're also creating IP, which is your future business. So in case you leak critical IP out or you don't control it properly, what you're doing is you're losing your future business, and no one wants that. My last point here is maybe the change of procurement. So what I've seen in the business is that we're working with entrepreneurial people who are really fast moving. They want to make things happen fast, and they are ready to change the ways that we work. So for example, on the engineering side, which drives our business quite heavily, the engineers in the beginning don't necessarily know what they actually want, but they are able to define that together with suppliers. And if you let the engineers discuss with suppliers, you might end up in a difficult position for later negotiations. So what we've done is we've given the engineering team, the team leaders and the engineers themselves a training. We've trained them. We still need to train them on basic commercials, on basic procurement, so that everyone becomes a buyer in the sense. Because when they discuss with the suppliers, they need to understand that there is, at some point of the work together with the supplier, there becomes the point where you need to contract, where you need to put commercial framework in place to really serve the business. Yes, it's fun to develop, but there's business behind. Those are my points that I'd like to share with you. My experiences since 2016 in a business that is turning digital, working with.
Okay, great stuff. I mean, that's a really interesting example of how technology can be applied in this way. And obviously, some elements of that are very unique, but I think the thinking around the implementation, how the team's structured in terms of who is doing the work and how the role that procurement is playing in this, I think there are some interesting takeaways from that. A couple of points some of you have asked. The slides will be made available post-event, so you will be able to receive those if you've registered for today's event. Also, obviously, that was from a presentation that Rami gave at the Procurement Leaders Data Intelligence and Technology Forum in London in early winter in 2018. He is obviously not available on this call today, so some of you asked very specific questions about his presentation. We will make those questions available to him, but obviously those who've asked something very specific about what he's presented there, we'll ask for him to answer at a later date rather than on today's webinar. But fortunately, when we're thinking more about digital transformation, we're thinking about some of the larger trends in terms of technology and what's coming down the track and what we should be doing to adapt. We have a great speaker lined up today to have a look at that from a slightly broader perspective. So excited to introduce Vivek Saneja from GEP. Vivek, over to you.
Thanks, Steve. And that was an interesting presentation. One of the key themes that stuck out to me in that presentation was the notion of self-driving ships or self-driving autonomous vehicles, if you will. That's an interesting and emerging area, and it's the same concept, same ideas are actually now being applied in managing supply chains. The notion of self-driving supply chains, essentially driven by analytics and intelligence, artificial intelligence in particular. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we get into this discussion, which is really going to build on some of the ideas that were in the previous presentations. So I'll talk a little bit about key trends and challenges that we're seeing in the marketplace, what kind of next generation solutions for supply chain planning and execution and inventory management are emerging, those that are utilizing newer technologies like analytics, artificial intelligence, big data, and so forth. We'll touch a little bit on the inventory optimization and replenishment methods and how some of that is actually going to go into digital procurement also. So let me just jump right into it. Key challenges and trends that we're seeing over and over again, no matter what industry we go into, is disruption. Disruption because there is digital technologies emerging which are driving different buying behaviors, which are basically disrupting every business model that you can think of, whether it's driving ships or supporting ships, or in CPG or retail, it's the how buying behaviors of consumers, or in oil and gas, it's all about leveraging digital technologies to do a better job in drilling operations or servicing, maintenance, you name it. There is disruption with these digital technologies in every industry that you can think of. So that leads to a tremendous amount of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity in the marketplace. And there is essentially very little utilization of all that data that's everywhere. It's all around us, data coming through our mobile phones, through devices, through social media and many other channels. And a big challenge is to first and foremost capture that data, and secondly, how do you use that data to predict what's going to happen in your supply chain and how to manage the supply chain, and then how do you automate some of that. So the challenges are, lack of economics of information, and then technology providers are not really providing a solution that covers the full gamut of what we need on a day-to-day basis to run our supply chains, all the way from planning to execution to visualization of what's going on in the supply chain. And the end state vision really is actually very simple. With all that data, wouldn't it be cool if we could have a complete view of what's going on across the entire supply chain? And wouldn't it be cool if the AI technology would automatically sense what's going on the customer side, on the supplier side, and would automatically autonomously make adjustments and continue to drive, and we as supply chain practitioners would just get alerts and exceptions. Wouldn't it be cool? Yeah, that's the vision. That's what we're trying to get to, and that's really where we're seeing what most of our customers and markets are looking for. One is integrated planning and execution piece, which is essentially real-time optimization and the notion of quote-unquote self-correcting, self-driving, autonomous, you name it, right? And to be able to make that happen, cognitive platforms which are cognizant of all the plans and provide real-time status and so forth. So the challenge is that today's technologies and traditional methods of how we've been doing supply chain planning and execution for the last 2 decades just doesn't work in this environment. And that's really why you need new technologies. And this is not just me saying. There's a tremendous amount of research, and I'm sure all of you are seeing that all around you. Disruption is fundamentally transforming the supply chain solutions, and there's been a tremendous amount of research that's been conducted in this space. And long and short of that research is, and what is depicted on this page also, is essentially all supply chain planning and execution processes will transform dramatically over the next 5 years. Predictive and prescriptive analytics and automation technologies are changing the solution landscape, and artificial intelligence, machine learning, cognitive solutions will be, and already are actually, which I'll talk about in a minute, will be the differentiating solutions. So I get this a lot from my customers and clients. Hey, what should I be focused on? What's happening? What to expect? So that's what this slide is depicting, which is there is clearly a shift from sequential to concurrent planning. In the old days, we used to plan very sequentially. We used to have this 5-6 week sales and operations planning process. Somebody runs a forecast, somebody reviews it, somebody updates it, somebody then agrees on a number after fighting about it, and then you transfer the number over to supply planning side. Those guys execute. Everybody knows forecast is wrong. Everybody ends up building a little bit of their own buffer, and the bullwhip effect just keeps growing and growing. So that is changing dramatically. The idea of a sequential plan and 5 to 6 weeks process in a typical organization to agree on that one number in S&OP, out the window. It's continuous planning. It's concurrent planning. You're always connected to the market. You're always sensing what's going on in the market and constantly adjusting. And the idea of autonomous is you shouldn't have to do that manually. If you have the technologies that connect you to the market, and if you have the technology to automatically figure out what changes are happening and what to do about it, that's really the idea of, autonomous and to change from sequential to concurrent. Nobody's got it fully automated and autonomous at the moment, but it's certainly moving in that direction. And the idea of forecasting based on what used to be history-based forecasting is also basically out the window. It's more figuring out what's going on in the market, what will happen in the market, and predicting that based on causal factors, because the data is available. You have so much data about what the consumers are doing, what the customers are doing, what the customers want, what they will need. Why don't we use that data and figure out what the forecast should be from a business standpoint, and what should we be selling and when and how much? So that's happening as we speak. And then pivoting to more deterministic, optimized, self-correcting, self-driving, that is an emerging idea. Automation with AI is also an emerging idea, and it's happening a little bit right now. And creation of synchronous planning ecosystem is also happening as we speak. So these are the ones, these drivers are really what's changing the game. And I want to take a minute to talk a little bit about this fundamental shift. Most supply chains in most business and most industries today are designed to be what we call inside out. Thinking about what you're going to sell, who you're going to sell from an internal enterprise perspective, and then forecasting that. That's the old way, and that's where the ERPs of the world. I saw some questions that came in about, what's going on with SAP, Oracle, ERP, other providers, and how are their current methods different from what's going to be needed in the future. So these guys essentially built their solutions 2 decades ago, and these solutions were, for almost more than a decade now, were focused on integrating internal systems, CRM, supplier relationship management, advanced planning systems, transportation management systems, warehouse management systems. That was the idea of integrated supply chain. When we talk about integrated, connected supply chains, that's not what we mean. What we mean is we're connected to the customer. We're connected to the market. And by understanding what the customer or the markets need and doing that in an always-on mode, we can then drive our plans and execution based on knowing what the customer wants when. And yes, the customers are fickle. Buying behaviors are very different from what they used to be, and consumers are fickle. So we need to be able to manage through that volatility, ambiguity, and complexity that I mentioned earlier, and then be able to drive your plans and execute based on that. And that's the idea of outside-in supply chain, which is a fundamental shift that many organizations are still struggling to accomplish. What does it mean to procurement? So when I say execution, procurement is in the end executing to buy products to fulfill what an organization is going to sell, right? So procurement then becomes on the receiving end of the plans, because if you know what's going to happen in the market, if you know what you're going to sell, then based on that, I'm going to decide what I'm going to buy and how much and when, right? So because that's always changing, it's volatile, procurement needs to be then in a position to respond to that volatility also, and that's the idea of responding in real time. So that's where the idea of data, visibility, insights, sensing before responding, and shaping and orchestrating demand comes in, and then driving procurement based on that understanding and insight is hugely critical. So if you're a procurement professional, that's a big deal. You need to be connected, just like demand planners and other folks, to the market and drive your supply base and procurement processes with that insight and equipped with that intelligence. So what kind of next generation solutions are emerging? I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about that. Data. It's all about data, right? So like I said, there's all kinds of data available. Think about a retail or a consumer products goods company. There's data about macroeconomic drivers of what's going to happen in the market. If you're a CPG company or a retail company, you know what's going on at the point of sale. There's all kinds of weather, climate drivers of disruptions in your supply chains. The data for that also is available. There are many other demand drivers. If you're a CPG company, promotions, social media. Historical demand, of course, is something we have traditionally used. Another important thing is this new products coming out every day, every week. Many companies, in the old days, we used to advise clients, minimize SKU proliferation, minimize products, focus on products that are most profitable. That's no longer the case. Consumers are wanting more and more products and more innovation and different types of solutions in different situations. So the number of products is generally also going through the roof, and as a result, you need to integrate that view into understanding what's going to go on in the market, and of course, shipments and many others. So long and short of it is, there's more data about the market, there's data about the product, and there's data about the demand. You can basically capture that data from numerous sources, internal to the enterprise and external, and use that as inputs in your predictive engine, which is, for the most part, machine learning based technology, and that would spit out these types of predictions which you want to be able to consume in your planning solutions. And then planning solutions need to be connected to execution solutions, and this whole process needs to be closed loop so that you're constantly understanding what's going on in the market, how are we executing relative to the plans, and where and how we need to dynamically on a real time adjust these plans and drive our execution in a way that is still optimal to achieve our profitability or other strategic objectives as a business. So that's really what the architecture of the future really needs to be, which essentially translates into something like what I'm sharing in this slide, which is a constant iterative recalculation, if you will. You have demand sensing activities, which is driven off of all the data that you're capturing from the market. Very typically, you have these numerous sources of data. Data may be structured, data may be unstructured. You need to bring it all in the right, all in one place, normalize it, cleanse it, make it available to your intelligence application or solution so that it can consume that data and derive intelligence from it. And based on that intelligence, you put in processes which generally are either demand sensing type of activities, or often you can do demand shaping, but constantly optimizing and doing constant optimization between demand volatility and how you should run your supply chains, production, logistic operations, and procurement operations based on that. So that's really, it's an iterative, ongoing, always on process, which is very different from how most organizations operate today. So that's really the construct for the future that we're starting to work with a lot of clients with. And it's very iterative in how we go about developing this type of solutions, and how do we transition from current to future. So what that means, what does that mean also to within the four walls or processes for procurement. Procurement as a technology, sourcing to contract and procure to pay, also is getting lots of automation and intelligence within it. So what you see in this slide is on the front end of it, you see demand forecasting, which I talked about, which is the notion of being connected to the market. But you're getting tremendous amount of sourcing intelligence as well. Not only do you know what's going on the demand side in the markets, but on your supply markets, what's going on. You're connected to numerous sources of data on the supply markets as well, whether it's commodities or futures or suppliers, what they're doing, potential disruptions and predictions in your supply side, anything like that would go into sourcing intelligence, which you always use, and then you drive your contracting and procurement and pay. And within the source to procure to pay processes, there's tremendous opportunity to leverage next generation digital technologies, automation, and eventually autonomous ways of executing procure to pay processes, which is constantly staying on top of what are the risks, as I mentioned earlier, and how do I constantly optimize my procurement processes. And again, to take full advantage of how to make this source to pay process much more efficient, you are consuming loads and loads and loads of data and running very sophisticated analytics and optimization on top of it. And wherever possible, you're using automation technologies. There's lots of talk about robotic process automation and touchless procurement, voice-based interaction, natural language processing with the application. It's almost having a conversation with an Alexa. Hey Alexa, how my supplier is doing, and those kind of things are happening, and that's really what's also changing the game in source to pay processes. So this, as you can see, ties very well with the broader trend of intelligence and data and analytics and automation and autonomous operations. So that's really where the world is heading, and we're working with a lot of customers to make this happen. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm ready to take a few questions. Steve, back to you.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Vivek. Really interesting to kind of balance the, I guess, the tight focus of Rami's presentation with thinking about some of the big trends and looking at the questions that have come in. A lot of our audience is seeing similar areas and have got a lot of questions around it. So we have a bit of time left, and you and I, Vivek, are going to kind of field a few questions. I'll provide a bit of a kind of procurement leader's perspective, and we'd love to hear your take on some of these questions that are directly for you. So let me pitch a couple at you, and we'll see how we get on. So Vivek, I think maybe it makes sense to me to read this one straight out. So when thinking of a digital roadmap and strategy, what timeline should you consider, and how will the timeline be impacted by changes in technology throughout the journey? But is it advisable to lock yourself into a 3 to 5 year contract? So I want to ask that one to you, Vivek, but I would just say that one of the things we see with procurement leaders that unfortunately the answer is you are going to have to work that out on an individual basis. There is never a straight up option to say no, 3 to 5 year contracts are too long. Procurement functions need to be more agile in how they think about transformations. That said, if you are securing a software as a service or you are working with a platform, implementing that is a serious investment. So looking at longer term contracts, or depending on what you think of 3 to 5 years, looking at those kind of longer contracts is often something that organizations do and have benefited on, because they build a partnership with the service provider and they really kind of double down on that investment. So I guess what I'm driving at is it depends on the technology, and really what it comes down to is procurement's ability to execute shorter contracts effectively and kind of have those quick win projects, as well as looking at how to manage the change, manage the implementation that comes with a larger investment for a 3 to 5 year. If you can't do both of those things, then you often miss out on kind of fragments of the technology market, and that's something we see from organisations as we look at who have matured more quickly on the digitalisation curve. But that was the procurement leader's perspective. Vivek, what do you think about that question around timelines and the viability of 3 to 5 year contracts being locked in there? What's your take?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll take a few minutes to talk about the environment today and then answer the question. When you're embarking on a journey for digital transformation, there's good news, which is you're going to find all these innovations and technologies and transformations super exciting. The bad news is nobody has done it before, including those consultants and service providers and those. Everybody has points of view. Everybody has ideas. In the end, to build the right solution is a partnership, which Steve, you alluded to, and you also used the word agile. So the way to build these capabilities has to be done in that rapid prototyping plus agile mode, which is very different from what has been happening in the ERP world for the last 2 decades, where the ERP provider would say, "I've got a prepackaged solution, configure it and adapt it to your business." That's where people used to get into those multi-year contracts. But now it's innovation, which is collaboratively developed between you as the client and the service providers and consultants and solution and software providers. You're no longer buying on-premise software and deploying it with system integrators and then executing on that. You are partnering with someone who has some thought leadership, some innovation, some solutions, and solutions are mostly digital platforms. They're no longer packaged software, which in the old days used to claim to have all the best practices built in. No, there is no such thing. Best practice itself is a moving target. So you need to constantly innovate, and that's why this agile methodology is important. And you very typically want to also learn quickly. And in that agile methodology, you need to have a philosophy of experiment and fail fast if you have to. And it's okay to fail. It's okay. Failure should not be looked negatively upon. If it didn't work, you tried, capturing a lot of data, for example, and try to run intelligence, and intelligence didn't come out as you were expecting. Okay, let's try something else. So that idea of constant innovation in an agile manner is hugely critical, and that's why it is highly recommended if you do indeed get into long-term partnership. The partnership should be focused on outcomes, and you should break up the delivery into very small time frames, come up with these so-called sprints, and they are typically 4 months, 6 months, no longer than that. And within 4 to 6 months, you know where you're going. And if you have a solution that builds what you're thinking it's going to do, continue to build on it, continue to innovate, and capture more and more data and get more and more intelligent over a period of time. And that's how you kind of navigate through this transformation journey. I hope that answers the question.
Great stuff. Thank you, Vivek. I'm going to try and plow on and see if we can get through a few more questions. We've had some great ones in. So this is kind of looking at the capability element. And again, I'll offer the procurement leaders for you quickly, and Vivek, then I'd love to hear from you. So the question is, what is the profile of a future procurement manager? What are the 3 main skills you would name as must-have in a digital supply chain? So one of the things I can say is, procurement leaders have been looking at, we provide our members, and for those who aren't members, this is something you should be aware of, we provide our members with competency models and ways of thinking about what the skills and the competencies that their teams need to have. And if I reflect on what we see as being some of the most valuable from thinking about the digitalization perspective, 3 really kind of jump out to me. It would be impossible to say there are I think there are must-haves other than to have technology savvy. I think it would be very difficult to say you just these 3, but 3 really jump out to me. One would be disruptive thinking. So it's very difficult if you're doing the same things to do anything other than kind of iterate on what you've been already doing, and then you, as a function, risk kind of falling behind. So you need to understand what's available in the market. You need to also be able to be creative in order to think differently. So you need that kind of thinking within your team. Some people have very specific roles set up to do that. Some people look to engender that as a kind of more culturally and think about how they can get their team to encourage them to experiment and try different behaviors, which is what Vivek was referring to earlier. So disruptive thinking would be one piece. I guess another piece would be, if we've said about we want to encourage people to dismantle things and to do things completely differently, you also need to understand the rules and understand, how things should be playing out. So things like being able to work on, understand and map procurement processes and recognize governance as it needs to be applied. That feels to me very important. You have to understand the rules in order to break the rules. You have to know what procurement is responsible for and expected to be doing in order to know where its responsibilities lie when you're introducing new technology. So what are you going to have to integrate with? Which users are going to have to be able to access this, and what are they going to expect from it? So I think that piece around governance is an important kind of set of skills that it's hard to avoid. And then I also think a final piece would be business communications. So one of the things we're very invested in the idea of here at Procurement Leaders is storytelling. Procurement's ability to explain the value of a particular technology to stakeholders, or to explain to them how procurement can help them. Having that ability within your team is just as useful as being able to set up the technology in the first place. If you can establish technology, integrate it, you can demonstrate results, that's all very good within procurement, but the ability to work with stakeholders to get them to use it and get them to understand how it works, that is critical to making this more of a cross-team effort and ultimately more of a success. So that ability to partner with or communicate with the business feels like a very important skill set as well. So that's my take. Vivek, do you want to offer a view on these skills that are important in the digital supply chain?
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, what I'm seeing working with my clients, a typical procurement professional spends 70% of their time or more in some cases chasing data, figuring out what's going on, matching invoices to purchase orders, figuring out receipts, and you name it. It's all transactional data tracking. In the world that is emerging, leave that to the machines. Don't worry about data. Data machines will take care of. There is very sophisticated technologies. But what you need is, what machines also need, is that strategic thinking, understanding of markets, not only on the supply side, but also understanding what's going on the demand side. And you will, no matter which way you look at it, will have to coexist with the machines, whether it's artificial intelligence applications, robots or anything in between. But machines, while they're going to be doing super awesome work, they still need to be trained. They still need to be enabled to do what we expect the machines to do, whether it's autonomous operations, data management, consuming data, to do predictions, and learning how to coexist with the machines and delineation of what kind of tasks you want to assign to the machines and what kind of tasks you want to do. And the human brain is still very much needed. So human intelligence plus artificial intelligence is the world we're heading towards. So the procurement professionals should identify where that human intelligence is needed and focus on building skills in that space, which fundamentally translates to strategic thinking, broad-based market understanding, and telling the machines how to make the right decisions.
Thanks very much, Vivek. I'm going to see if we can get a few more questions in here. So I'm going to read out this question that's come in around AI. So I'll read the full thing, but I think there's a bit I want to focus on. Do we already have IA software ready and available to manage all of the data captured by sensors? So I think they're referring here to the Rolls-Royce kind of case study there. And I think then the question that follows this is when do you think simple, real, and efficient AI could be ready for the industry? Are we talking months or years? So when I think about that piece around AI, and Vivek, I know this is something that you're very excited about, and rightly so, this is one of those areas where we see organizations starting to, in the last couple of years, really have flipped over from that kind of looking at AI at a distance saying this could do something to really starting to experiment and start to see results even. If we look at Procurement Leaders' data and technology report from last year, bear in mind there's one still to come this year, but last year's data and technology research, we saw that 29% of organizations that we surveyed were in preliminary exploration with machine learning systems, 8% developing a solution, and 4% solution deployed. Now you could argue so that's a very, very low number at 4%. But realistically, when you compare it to a lot of the other areas, such as, say, blockchain, where the numbers are very negligible, there are many organizations who are starting to be able to make a business case when it comes to AI. And sometimes it's only in small areas, and being able to pick apart a particular process and say, this is something where AI can be involved. It doesn't involve the level of commitment and change management as I think some people might expect when you hear about the capability of AI. They're able to kind of focus it in particular areas, understand how it works, understand the exact results they're looking for from it and the efficiencies they're hoping to make, apply the change, and then look to see where they can scale. So we really see this as perhaps, it's no surprise that when we've asked CPOs, they rank this as the number one technology that will disrupt procurement over the next 5 years. It's no surprise to see that the hype is starting to translate in a very real way into activities and business examples of how this is being applied. Vivek, maybe you could offer your take on AI. I know it's a lot to cram into a few minutes, but when you come back to the question, when do you think simple, real, and efficient AI could be ready for the industry? A couple of months, years? I guess I'm saying I think it's already out there. It's a case of whether we're brave and whether we understand where it can be applied. What's your thoughts there?
Absolutely. Simple answer is the technology is already here. When you break it down, the technology to process lots of data, figure out the right algorithms, doing the predictions, prescriptions based on that data. Ability to do that is here using different technology platforms. Consume a lot of data, capture a lot of data. Ability to do that is here. Talk to the machines in natural language and let the machines respond. The technology is already here. Let the machines recognize images or text or read documents and convert that unstructured data into structured data, already here. Now it's a matter of how do I tie it all together to build solutions for my business, for my industry. The building blocks are all here. There's even much of it is actually also available in the cloud-based solution providers. Amazons and Googles and Microsofts of the world are already giving in the cloud environment pre-built solutions like data management, data lakes, pre-built algorithms, even natural language processing and so forth. Now, how do we use these technologies to build solutions for our business? That's where that agile development and thinking is needed. and we're ready to start working with customers, and you guys should also start working with your partners to iteratively build, figure out the right technologies you want to use, and then start to build solutions that make sense for your business in a way that you can create most value in the shortest period of time.
Thanks very much, Vivek. I want to see if we can cram in a little bit more. So thanks for bearing with us. Rightly so, given I guess the focus on supply chain, we've been thinking about the direct side. I was wondering if you could, if there's anything you could bring to life at a very high level around the indirect piece. So just a question that's come in, being how can you make a business case to invest in procurement tools, looking at the indirect side, and generally when we're thinking about this, that's a much less structured area. Is there something we can offer at a high level there about thinking around what the real opportunity is there when it comes to some of the trends we've been talking about as they apply to indirect? Is that something you could share there, Vivek?
Absolutely, and the same ideas and principles apply in indirect that I just talked about. You can do much more. You have a lot more sourcing intelligence today than you had before. So if you're not using analytics and sourcing intelligence and identifying the right suppliers, you're missing out. Similarly, you have opportunities to streamline, automate, and run these procure-to-pay processes autonomously. The technologies like robotic process automation, like integration, data management, already there. If you're not leveraging those technologies, then again, you should. These things. Similarly, any kind of price advisory, intelligent price advisories in cost modeling, scenario analysis, and indirect space, very much available today. You can have things like cognitive buying assistants and intelligence agents and purchasing playbooks in different categories based on tremendous amount of data and intelligence available today. Catalogs, you have ability, because of the high volumes of data, you have advanced data management, data enrichment capabilities, transaction automations. You can do that today. You can manage risks using all that data that's available. And if those same principles of how to use data, convert that into intelligence, and find ways to automate and streamline your processes, they apply as much in indirect procurement as they do indirect procurement.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Vivek. Now, we have had a lot of questions in, and I do appreciate that some of you have been waiting patiently. Unfortunately, that's all we have got time for today. So it's important that I make you aware, if you've submitted any questions, those will be made available to Vivek, and we will be, specifically the ones from Rami, will be sending his way as well. So if you haven't had your question answered, please don't give up. We'll be making those available to our speakers post-event. I will also, as I said, be making the slides available as well. So if you've registered for today's webinar, you will be able to access those slides. And a couple of quick reminders. We'd really love you to leave your feedback so that you can, so that we'll be providing a request for you to leave your feedback there. We'd love to hear what you make of today's webinar, and hopefully you enjoyed it. Just to kind of very quickly recap, we've been looking at the idea of optimizing inventory management and thinking about supply chain planning, and particularly the role of data and how that can be applied there, and the potential for new technologies like new analytics and AI to really sort of enhance that. We've been looking at how to match that technology capability with the demands of indirect and direct, and we've leaned a little bit heavy on the direct, but there's a lot of crossover with the two in terms of working out technology capability, what's on the market, understanding that, assessing that, and really starting to match that with your own plans. And then really when we talk about the plans, it's what questions to ask, what criteria to focus on. So we talked about how to think about those contracts, how to think about your own readiness as an organization to adapt, what skills you need, and so really where do you need to adjust when you're looking at how to adopt new technologies effectively. I'd like to finally thank GEP for partnering with us to bring you today's event, and of course to thank our excellent speakers today, so Vivek Saneja, so thank you very much to Vivek, and although he's obviously having pre-recorded this, but we were delighted to have Rami Swomanan speak on the really exciting project that he was working on as well. So thank you to both our speakers. And of course, thank you to you, the audience today, for making it a really interesting and engaging event. I found it useful and exciting to hear your questions. Hopefully you took something from today. Please do join us again next time.